Welcome everybody to, I think it's the second Stormwater New South Wales / CRC for water sensitive cities seminar or webinar series leading up to the conference, which is coming up, I believe is in March. Beth may correct me, but it's coming very soon, and this is part of the lead into that. And we've got two speakers today. Christian Ulrich, I hope I've said that correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, is going to look at the climate change and the scenario tool, which is something that he was heavily involved with at Monash University in the development of the scenario tool, which he'll go through. And he was with Monash University doing that sort of stuff until, I think it was last week, and is now part of, joined a consultancy called ARC. And he'll give a better introduction about himself than I will when I'm done here. And then we've got Tim Wakefield will be the next presenter, and he's currently with AECOM, working as a civil engineer. And his climate change and music presentation is based on an honours thesis that he did or completed back in 2019 with the Western Sydney University. And also, not forgetting myself, Andrew Thomas, I'm the Vice President of Stormwater New South Wales, helping out Beth with this particular webinar. So, enough ado, I will stop sharing, and if you could jump in, Chris, let's get into it.
Yeah, just gonna take just a couple of seconds to find my presentation here.
Sure thing.
Here we go. Come on screen. So. All right, here we go.
Yep.
You can see that, I hope. So we're good to go. All right, full screen. Awesome. Hope you can see that. If not, just give me a shout out.
Oh, we can see it. Good.
Cool. Yeah, so thanks, Andrew, and really appreciate for having me here today. What I'm going to talk about is about the scenario tool and how we use climate change in the scenario tool. As Andrew just mentioned, I have been leading the development of the scenario tool until the end of last year. We're in the new year, and now it's just started a new role at HAG, where we continue to use some of those tools as well. Now, before I want to go into the nuts and bolts of the scenario tool, I want to talk a little bit about why is it so important that we have easy access to climate change data and how to use them. And this is some research where we use this tool more out of a scientific environment, but then applied it to a case study, and I found some really interesting insights, and also the motivation of why we're integrating those in the scenario tool. So this is was a case study, the CRC for water sensitive cities in Victoria in Elwood. Now, Elwood itself is a really small pocket. You might have seen that in metropolitan Melbourne, and faces similar challenges as we have probably across Australian cities. So Elwood is already prone to flooding, but we obviously have that intense pressure of increased population growth. So it's kind of similar to Sydney. We're going to double the population until 2050. We get massive infill developments, and most of that should go within the existing urban footprint, which we'll see a massive rise in all those impervious area that we see here, which has the knock-on effects around urban heat, increased runoff, increased stormwater pollution. So all those issues that we're quite familiar with. On the other hand, we have climate change on top. So we'll see sea level rise, obviously. We have a massive increase in rainfall intensities, which is going to become an issue. And it's about the combined effects that are really going to make us struggle, particularly when it comes to flooding. So we've done modeling around here where we can see the extent of flooding in this particular catchment. And what we found with that work is then we compared it to today's flooding. There's roughly about 10 to 20 times more properties are going to be affected by that. And one of the major challenges is not just the most extreme flood events, which are going to be more severe. It's basically that your 1 in 20 flood event, which happens semi-regularly, will become far more frequent. So they will become your new 1 in 5 year flood events and even lower return periods for that. So this is just going to be huge challenges. And when you translate that into the economic cost, what that means, as I said, what we've found then here, you can see there should be a blue dot. If you just consider climate change, it's obviously that massive increase already, so 5 to 10 times more. But as soon as you start also to take into account the increase in impervious area that we're going to expect, it's just this exponential growth of damage that we might experience. And this is what we're working on and have been done with a lot of the research with the CRC for water sensitive cities to really see how we can flatten that and really mitigate some of those risks. And this is also where the scenario tool is going to come in to really think about how can we do planning differently, how we can use decentralized systems, nature-based solutions, and how we can actually simulate that as well to create a more resilient urban form. Now, I think you have seen in the last week was that presentation on the scenario tool itself. Just a quick reminder, what is the tool? It really helps you to, so the idea is to rapidly evaluate new concepts and designs, particularly on that interface between urban planning and water infrastructure, so those water sensitive urban design elements. And the tool itself is integrating a couple of modules that allow you to do that. So you can look at land surface temperature, we can look at urban heat aspects, so air temperature and human thermal comfort, as well as then the urban water cycle. And today, this is, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. It's just a new room, John. If you could mute your microphone, this is a master feedback.
Yeah, if everyone could make sure that their microphones are muted so that we don't get any feedback.
So we're looking into those climate change scenarios. Now, apologies, we haven't done yet work in New South Wales, but I'm going to report a bit of the experience and the models available across Australia. So what you see here is the Queensland Climate Dashboard. Really recommend just having a look if you're interested in that. So those downscale climate change scenarios are becoming far more widely available now. So we have that, I think in most areas of Australia, they are done 5 by 5 kilometer grids, 10 by 10 kilometer grids. And it gives us those daily data about daily minimum, maximum temperatures, daily precipitation, and so on. And I've just been on the New South Wales government website last few days, and I think you probably are much more across this information than I am. But they have just released the beta version of the New South Wales Climate Data Portal. So this will also be public available data sets pretty soon. So that means then that everything that you see here, as we have applied it to Queensland, will also become available to all of New South Wales. Now, what we have done here is really making it easy and accessible, those data. So this was one of the main aspects, to make it simple to explore those impacts. So we have integrated fully with our microclimate assessment tool, which is called Target, as well as the water cycle tool. And we're fully integrated, you're going to see what that means just a little bit later. The data we're going to use here is really relying on those daily maximum and minimum temperature data that we're going to use in downscale to be running our models with that, as well as the data that we use in the water cycle model. And we'll say here it's available as NetCDF. So what that means, we're looking really spatially explicit. So it's not just one data point for a whole city. It's usually in those 5 by 5 kilometer grids or 10 by 10 kilometer grids. So you get that variability into your models as well. I'm going to just give you a bit of a snapshot of how we're actually using those data and also how these data look like. So this is now we extracted here one of the time series that we get for Townsville. So this is now the mean temperature that we get over a 120-year period. Now this is using one of those climate scenarios. Now just by looking at it, you can see that increase that we're going to experience in terms of that mean temperature that we see here. Now how we're using that in a model is that we split the data up into, and that's user defined in the end, but we have here 20-year periods that we're looking at. And now we start to sort those based on the maximum mean temperature that we get So it's kind of these are basically sorted data. It's similar to rainfall intensities when you're working with that in your stormwater. And when we do that for the different periods, you can then see here, for example, what we see from the year 2000 to the year 2020, and how the average temperature is gonna just rapidly increase into the year 2100. So what it means is basically that today an extreme event might have a 33-degree temperature, where average temperature over 3 days, and this is kind of going to increase up to 38 degrees, for example, and more. So this is obviously quite significant consequences on that. Or if you put it differently, so we have here the red line at 30 degrees. So what today is an extreme day, you can look at that you might experience once a year or every other year. This will become the new normal when we look into the year 2100. So it's kind of, this is then just your average summer day is going to be at least as hot as today, the most extreme days, or even warmer. Now in the model itself, what you basically define is that exceedance probability. So this is similar with rainfall and rainfall intensities that are using a flat modeling. So here we're going to see, okay, we want to choose an event that's exceeded, let's say 20% in a year. Okay, out of that, then we can identify then a particular event that we're going to use in the model. So this is going back to the temperature data. And out of that, we're using then the maximum and the minimum temperature to downscale a 30-minute time series data for you. And this is based on the idea that the overall pattern of those weather conditions that we see might not be changing. So this is what we have assumed here as the underlying scenario. So what it means based on these historical heat wave conditions as we see them, this is also, we assume a similar pattern for the future scenarios, and this is what we use here for downscaling. Now what can you do with those data? That's probably more interesting. So we've done here as part of work with the Water Sensitivities Institute, looking into Queensland and simulating, in this case, the human thermal comfort for all of the developed areas in Queensland. And we're zooming here into Townsville. And what we can see here is, this is now plotting out as it will look today. And then you can take your climate change scenarios and put them on top of it and see how that might change in the future. And then you can see in some of the most extreme areas, we're going to see a 13 to 16 degree increase on an already extreme heat day. And as you can imagine, obviously, Townsville in Queensland is really humid, really hot already. And now you put 10 degrees on top of that. It just gives you a bit of an idea how severe that's going to feel. Probably more relevant, I guess, for this community, and is also starting to zoom into rainfall and what we're going to do with those data. So the model itself is quite simplified. We're using a simple 24-hour based water cycle model. We use here a similar approach. So you can see here the annual rainfall time series that we have extracted out of one of those climate change scenarios going over this 120-year period. We've done a similar approach. We split it up in 20 years just to visualize that. And then basically plotting the exceedance of that. So that means basically here the wettest year down in the graph has about 3 meters of rainfall, whereas the driest you will find being about 450 millimeters in this particular area. Now, climate change doesn't seem to have much of an impact for this particular scenario. And this is just want to highlight here about to be cautious in that if you do your modeling, you should always look at multiple scenarios at the same time. Because here we're comparing now, this one has been done by CSIRO, it's one of the downscale scenario, and the other one is based on the XS1 data. It's the same time series, we're going for over these 120 years, same periods, but you can see between 2060 and 2100 in the CSIRO scenario, we have roughly a third of the rainfall compared to the XS1 scenario. So it just gives you the range of the uncertainties also that you have to deal with. So in your modeling, and also this scenario, it will always look at multiple scenarios at once. Now, how that's used in the tool, you basically can define, now if you look at through the exceedance at a dry year, at a typical year in that period, or at a wet year, and then just basically pick that and then use that in your modeling. So this is done in an automated way. Just a bit of an idea how that looks in the tool. So it's fully integrated in that. If you have used the scenario tool, You can basically go in the side panel, say climate change scenario. You want to use target, or you want to use the urban water cycle model. Should be the other way around, yeah. And if you have set that up, so this is now one of the case studies here that we're looking at. Is that going to work? Yeah. It comes up with those dialog boxes. And now you can choose here for which period you're going to look at. So maybe like here from the 2050 to 2070, it can be user defined up to 2100. You define the exceedance. In this case, as exceedance, this will be the most extreme scenario in terms of heat that we're looking at, and the 50% exceedance for the urban water cycle. So that would mean it's an average year in that given period. Then you can choose your scenarios. Okay, and based on that, the model now would extract those time series data as we have seen it before. So just show that and run the assessment with that. The results that you're getting now, this is on this graph here, which is comparing our rainwater harvesting, is now comparing the business as usual scenario that we had with the climate change scenario. So we see the obvious one here, the air temperature is going up to 6 degrees under the most extreme scenario, which is quite significant. But we also see a massive reduction in rainfall, as well as an increase in water demand to compensate for that. So whereas we have the decrease in rainfall, we will see the increasing demand that we need for irrigation and so on. And the tool will give you that in far more detail. So you can look at the individual components of the water cycle, and also then on it also gives you time series data for each day to really zoom into all those components. Now, obviously, as I said, this is then one of the time series, for example, for the stormwater runoff. Now, the annual runoff might be, in this case, I think it's only half of what we see today, but that doesn't mean that your peaks might go away. So this would then show, for example, the peak runoff on a given day would then still be more severe with that 2060 with the drier scenario, because we just get a few more intense rainfalls in. And now with that tool, you can then start to really explore different scenarios. How would rainwater tanks, other systems, how we can combine them to mitigate some of the effects and understand the performance of that at a high level. If you're interested and want to dive down into that, there is on the website, there are training materials, particularly for those scenarios that you have just seen. We guide you step by step through that as well. Or you can also get in touch with the CRC or with myself. I'm more than happy to walk you through and to explore what can be done with the tool. And I hope to give you a bit of a snapshot what you can do, and how important it is to have those climate change data in the tools now available and ready available and really easy accessible, which makes it a really useful tool then to explore a lot of different scenarios. Thank you. And I've seen in the chat if there's anything urgent.
All righty, so that's ready for questions, Chris?
Yeah, we probably have a panel, I think, afterwards, but I can do a couple here.
Yeah, we can do a couple. I've got one for you in the chat already.
Yeah.
And that's from Philip Jordan. And I'll read that verbatim. It's how reliable is a single replicate? It seems like picking a 20-year time slice for something like mean temperature might be okay, but it's probably not great for looking at things like rainfall that have more variability, question mark.
Yeah, and this is a really fair comment. So it's kind of, this is then a little bit up to the user, where we need to look into how you actually then use the assessment. So the tool is then an idea to start to understand a little bit those periods. They should be long enough. So what you shouldn't do is then pick just a single year, because as just mentioned here, this gives you a lot of variability. However, there's also an aspect in there, if your time series is just really, really long, it might not be able to replicate that trend that we're going to see as well. So it's kind of that shift. It's a bit of a trade-off between that. So it's kind of, yeah, 20 years is probably a bit short. So you should choose something a bit longer than that. But it is a bit different than compared to what we do at the moment, where we have this historical time series analysis. Yeah, which is assuming that the climate is stable or is staying the same.
Yeah,
it's building on that. But we actually, with climate change, we see that acceleration, and it's kind of hard to do that. But more than happy to discuss.
Well, Chris, I would imagine that the climate predictions on changes to rainfall and temperature going forward. There's still a lot of debate around that, I would imagine, even, and it's not, it's really limited by the climate change science rather than the tool itself, I would imagine.
I think what we find is and this comes down to long-term planning, if we look into that, it's actually often really important you have the flexibility to be able to respond if things are changing.
Yeah.
As we have seen here with the climate data before. So in some scenarios, it might actually give you more rainfall, whereas in other scenarios, even looking at the long-term time series now, it's going to start to be, it gives you 50% less rainfall. And that's kind of, now it comes to the question is how, it might be somewhere in between those, but how you're able to cope with that. How is your infrastructure going to be able to respond to that, to that variability? And I think that's something interesting with there's also stormwater management with those decentralized and centralized systems. There are ways to build that flexibility into the infrastructure.
Yeah. All righty. Well, look, I might dip into Tim now, Tim's presentation, because we've got 7 minutes before halfway, and it'd be nice to kick off and maybe have a muck in at the end. So I might get you to mute yourself, Chris, and if you're not already unmute, Tim, could you do so? There you are, if you could unmute yourself. Very good. All right, so I'll just give you a quick introduction, Tim. Tim Wakefield is, I think I've already said, currently AECOM civil engineer, completed his honours thesis in 2009 at Western Sydney University, and has been nice enough to give up his lunchtime to present his work, which we think is fabulous. So I think, Tim, you can take it from here.
All right, thank you very much, Andrew. All right, so thank you for the fond introduction. I'm Tim Wakefield, as mentioned, and this is my project from 2019. Okay, so to give you some background on the project, this was a development in the southwest growth area of Sydney, near to the new Aerotropolis that's currently under construction. At present, the area is sort of semi-rural, a lot of acreages and so on, and the area has been earmarked for medium density housing. The initial studies have been commissioned by the New South Wales government, and those were then handed on to the local council, which in this case was Camden. For the biofiltration, bioretention basins were the preferred method of treatment. So that was one of the limitations that I stuck with throughout the modelling. And the treated runoff was going to be passing into a creek, which then is a tributary to a major river in the area. So it was pretty important that I got this right. That's a photo of one of the areas as it is at present before construction has started. So as you can see, there's not a lot of impervious areas there. It's almost all pervious. And that's a photo of basically what it's going to look like. That's in the same area, only a few kilometres away from the development area.
Tim,
the screen changes.
yeah, your screen's not moving through. Can you try hitting your
Presentation.
the PowerPoint display button?
Okie doke.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
And if you put it on, the PowerPoint display, well, that's fine. We can see that.
All right.
Yep.
So that was the area as it is, and that's the area as it's going to be once construction is finished. And yeah, so as you can see, a lot of impervious areas coming into play. Now, if we have a look, that's taken from the State of the Climate Report from the Bureau of Meteorology. I think we're all aware of how severe climate change is going to be as the century progresses. And it was something I sort of had in mind throughout the project. I wanted to accurately represent the effects of climate change. Just if you're not familiar with the RCPs, I use the 4 RCPs as outlined by the IPCC as the basis for the modelling scenarios. And just a reminder, we are on course to hit 8.5 at the moment, and the technology doesn't exist for us to hit 2.6, which is pretty alarming, if you ask me. 2.6 is still going to be an increase of 1 degree over the base period of 1961 to 1990. So in terms of mean temperatures, that's the high and low range of each of those RCPs. I use the mean temperatures as the basis for the modelling scenarios. Just a quick word on the El Nino Southern Oscillation. So we're in the midst of a pretty typical La Nina phase right now, a very wet summer. This is a reminder, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, it sort of has a dominant effect on the weather systems of Eastern Australia. And it tends towards more extremes. Australia, the Eastern Seaboard tends towards the more extremes as it is. And although the ENSO is not very well understood compared to some other weather phenomena, there have been identified links between El Nino and fire activity, for example. There's also some evidence to indicate that places in Africa and North America can be affected by it as well. So it's a very strong weather phenomena system. So just on this sort of note, as part of the project, I did compile a list of extreme events, one of which was from 2015 to 2017, Houston, Texas experienced 3 1 in 500 year storms in 3 successive years, which that's rather alarming in itself. But when you're thinking about climate change, we have to anticipate that events like that are going to become more regular. As Christian mentioned, there is evidence, there's data that indicates that is more likely to occur.
Tim, just a second. I've got a few requests in the chat box. Can you hit the slideshow button down the bottom?
Yep.
More of a view of your slide.
Can you see that now?
It's still not coming up for my screen.
Yeah, I'll reshare the screen.
Yeah. Just we're getting a few.
Sorry about this.
No, that's all right. It's just the joys of Zoom.
Yes. How's that?
Okay, waiting. Yes. Thank you.
Great success. Okay. So in the respect of the music modelling itself, the Camden Council's engineering specifications were very good in that they gave me a lot of structure, a good place to start from. But one thing to consider is that those specifications don't consider climate change at this stage. And the other thing to consider that I was considering was that although we have 100 years of weather data from the Bureau of Meteorology, that historical data may not be representative of how the weather patterns are affecting the Eastern Seaboard in the future. So I think my screen's frozen. I'm sorry about this, Andrew.
Oh, that's all right. But this happens all, when we're doing this sort of thing.
All right.
Yep.
So they were the major phases of the project. Now, I'll sort of dive in a little bit onto the music modelling. The first thing that I took into account was one study that found that for every degree of increase in warming, the moisture capacity of the air increased about 7%. So that was very useful in the modelling for determining precipitation points. So amongst music, I was very lucky that Camden Council had some terrific GIS data that I was able to use to determine the areas of what developments are going to look like. Some very detailed plans on the final development, so I was able to determine pervious and impervious areas and such. So 2 series of simulations were created. The net increase was sort of a flat increase based on that 7% to all of the precipitation, or to all of the storm events over the modelling period. And the second one was an overall balance series where I maintained a water balance. So there you can see over the time period of the model, I managed to get the overall water balance extremely close to the basis. Now, once we came to actually doing the modelling, so this is the total biofiltration area required to maintain to satisfy the current council regulations. So the council regulations involve minimum reductions in total phosphorus, total suspended solids, nitrogen, and gross pollutants. So for the current regulations, in order to be compliant with those, the initial model based on the historical rainfall data was about 1.37% of the total area. Once I started to use that modified rainfall data, even at RCP 2.6, we were talking about a reasonable increase in the area required to stay compliant. And the further along we got to the more extreme scenarios, or the worst case scenarios, like in the case of RCP 8.5, in the overall balance series, we're talking about a 2% increase in area, to 2% of the total development area required, which is rather a lot. That's the increases, just depicted in a different way. So it's, by the time we get to RCP 8.5, we're talking about an extra third area required, just for these bioretention basins. So in terms of pollutant removals, these were the mean reductions based on the scenarios that were done. So in the present day, this was the compliant model, so passing all of the marks that Camden Council specified, and then as we went along, the pollutant removal amounts were massively reduced. Even at the point towards the end where the gross pollutant traps weren't able to keep up with what was happening. So after a bit of digging, the main reasons for why it was happening the way it was happening. So the high flow bypasses on the bioretention basins, the outflow pipes and obviously the surface area, they were the major factors. So the high flow bypass was something that it was extremely critical. Setting that point, I think from memory, most of the bioretention basins, the high flow bypass was supposed to be set at about a 1 in 2 year return period. So as time goes along and you're experiencing more extreme events, what used to be a 1 in 2 year event may not be a 1 in 2 year event anymore. It may be a 1 in 1 year event. And if we're designing something today and we're intending for it to have a 50 or 100 year design life, that may not be adequate anymore. That's something we need to look forward. Going forward, that's something we need to look at to ensure that our designs are appropriate for the design life that we are incorporating. So obviously the major result was that the water quality of the runoff is going to be negatively affected by climate change, depending on the models that I created. There are solutions to all of these things, but as with anything in engineering, there's always going to be extra costs, and it's up to us as engineers to have those conversations with our clients. But I think the biggest thing that I took away from this project is water sensitive urban design has to continue evolving with an evolving climate. I mean, today versus 2030, there's probably not a huge difference in weather patterns, but the data and the evidence indicates that the further along in this century we get, those extremes are going to happen, and our designs have to keep up with that. So obviously I want to thank Maria and Professor Surendra Stresser at Western Sydney University and the CRC and Stormwater New South Wales. Thank you kindly.
Yeah, thanks Tim for your time. Really appreciate it. Just look, I might be asking a bit of a dumb question here, but what the hell? I haven't used music for some time, but when I used it, I remember that you needed to import rain data, which was obviously historic rain data. Is there, can you go anywhere to get data predictions that time step in the way it needs to, or how do you deal with that in music? Yep.
So this was one of the benefits of working with Camden Council, and there are quite a few of the councils around New South Wales are like this. They have there's a function within music called Music Link that uses a predetermined set of rainfall data. I know with Camden, it's 6-minute pluviograph data located to one particular rainfall station it's very close by to the project area. I think it was positioned in Liverpool. For other councils, they will determine to use other weather stations, but it was 6-minute pluviograph data. So in that respect, it's good. 6 minutes is a nice small slice to determine storm events, precipitation levels, and also to determine runoff. So that data is available from the Bureau of Meteorology. That's how it's incorporated into music in the first place.
Yep.
So yeah, I used Bureau of Meteorology data for the modelling.
All right, so we've got a few questions coming in now, and I might get you, Chris, to come back in, and we'll do this as an open forum sort of questions. So you there, Chris? Can you unmute? Okay. I hopefully haven't missed anyone. So just bear in mind, everyone, I'm monitoring the chat, and you can also raise your hands. I think I can see most of you, but if I miss you, my apologies. I've only got a screen is a certain size. So I've got a question here from, hopefully I'll pronounce your name correctly. Shayla, this might be a very obvious question, but can we use the scenario tool to see impacts of climate change, temperature, rainfall, runoff, etc., for a particular development with a particular impervious surface percentage? I think that's to you, Chris.
Yeah. So I think for one single development, it's the resolution is not quite there. So we always recommend something a bit larger, which has at least up to 10 properties in there. But you can put in update individual property data in there and then see what the effect of that would be on that group in terms of urban heat and runoff changes, as well as climate change as well. So that is a way of doing that. There are other tools though that the CSC for water sensitive cities has developed that might be relevant for that. So there's something that you can do. There's an Excel spreadsheet tool that helps with water balances on more or for individual developments, so on lots, what that would mean, as well as then more high resolution heat assessment tools that you would use at that level.
Okay. I might, Zakia, I think I might unmute you. He's got his hand up, so we'll ask him to speak to you directly about his question. Just give me a second. If you could unmute yourself, Zakia, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Yep.
Thank you, Andrew and Christian. Thank you very much, and a very good morning from Pakistan. I would like to ask that under the urbanization impact, our cities, population of our cities is increasing. We are constructing more and more buildings, and we are reducing the recharge area. So whenever there is rainfall, I am talking about Lahore city, particularly Lahore city in Pakistan, and we are reducing the recharge to the groundwater. So is there any recommendation that if rainfall water is harvested and injected to the groundwater, what are the impact on its quality? Because normally we think that the rainfall water is not suitable for recharging the aquifer due to some impurities, acidic rains, and some other impurities. So what are the recommendations regarding the rainfall water harvesting for replenishment of depleted aquifer in urban cities?
Interesting question. I know Adelaide has done, and I'll let either one of you jump in, Tim or Chris, to continue, but that's a question about, if I've got it right, recharging the groundwater, and you put down the hard surfaces, you don't recharge the groundwater, and even if you do, the urban runoff may not be suitable. Now in Adelaide, they do some stormwater treatment and then put it back into the groundwater, but I'm not an expert on that. I'm not sure if either of you are, but that may be worth looking at Adelaide's solution. But anyway, Chris, you go.
I'm not an expert in that particular area, but I know I've worked with Anna Deletic. She has done a lot of the biofilter research, and also they have done, I think, huge success in Israel with those type of systems where they take stormwater runoff and then treat it, and then basically put that for recharge back into the aquifer. So if you are, if you want to know more about that, I'm more than happy to guide you in the right direction of how. But it's that smart combination of basically capturing stormwater and then using biofiltration and other systems to clean it before it goes into the aquifer to help with that pollution problem.
Okay, yeah, because in Adelaide they do that sort of thing. They use wetlands and other means to clean the water and then recharge it in, and they draw it out. But on top of that, they have a huge remain that goes around so that they can put the more porous bedrock further away and vice versa and bring it back up. So I don't know if that helps you answer your question, Zakur, but yeah, it is being done in Adelaide and, by the sounds of it, Israel as well. So that'd be worth looking into. Did you say, Chris, you might be able to provide some information on that?
Yeah, I might be happy to guide you in the right direction if you can get in touch with me.
Yep. All righty. So we're going to go to the next chat question. We've still got a little bit of time on our hands. We've still got just over 15 minutes. And here's a question for you, for either of you. What projected climate change scenario is shown on the plots? I'm not sure which one it's been referred to there. Assumed the baseline rainfall patterns have been increased by using some adjustment factors to determine the projected rainfalls. What evaporation data was used under the projected climate change scenarios? Is that for you, Chris?
I think it was for Tim on some of his chat. Yeah.
Yep, sure. So the evaporation data that was used, I don't know what the figures are offhand, but it was the standard. Those are the evaporation data. It was one of the things that was specified by the engineering specifications. It was consistent across all of the scenarios that I modelled. That was not a variable, mainly because I didn't have good data on what will happen later in the century in that region of Sydney. What projected climate change scenario is shown on the plots? On the plots, it was all of them. So yeah, I displayed all of the ones.
Okay. And we've got another one from Cyril here. How will tree canopy change with developments in Western Sydney? Oh, good question. I know from the council that I'm currently working with out there in Western Sydney, we do have a target to maintain, to provide a good coverage. I can't remember the exact figure, but this is an important question when it comes to keeping things cool and especially for the western suburbs. So yes, Cyril, good question. Chris and Tim, do you want to add anything to that? I mean, I don't think we can predict what will change, but I know that the councils are concerned about it and trying to maintain a tree canopy. But other than that, I can't answer that any further. Can you guys?
Yes, we have done some modelling that was for the Department of Water and Planning in Victoria for metropolitan Melbourne, and putting in a population projection and simulating out under business as usual what it might look like in 2052. And what you find is it's not great.
No.
So under current, it's going to be, but it depends on what the development patterns are. So we have the typical knockdown rebuild in the middle zones where you have this dual occupancy or small apartments. There's a massive loss of tree cover in that. So it's kind of instead of, so I think a lot of councils have that target that tree cover should go up, but the reality is with infill development is on the decline. So it's kind of we go from 20% down to 10. We looked then also into options. Is kind of we start to mandate to have at least a tree per new development or more, increase on public spaces and so on, tree covers. You can start to mitigate that, but it is the challenge that high turnover in the medium densities in these middle rings that we see, particularly in Melbourne. There's just a high turnover of development. And basically that means in terms of planning policies, would be great if there's something done early to be able then through time, because if those developments occur for the next 30, 40 years, then you can actually start to mitigate some of that, keep it at a similar level or even increase tree cover.
Yeah, and it's as much a modelling, well, it's probably more a planning question and sticking to that over time. I know that it's made the media a few times. Sun Herald and the ABC recently reported on the issue of tree canopy cover. It's kind of funny that we're at a place where we're now talking about, growing trees because they keep you cooler. Yeah. That seems obvious, but it's still making...
Yeah, it's that issue, that translation, and we also be translating it back to urban heat. And it's just a major challenge. in terms of if you, you just try, you think about yourself and 45-degree day, you just change the street side where there's a bit of shade where you can walk along.
Yeah.
Just those things.
Andrew,
But also, I think the same applies for stormwater management as well. So it's basically, if you can get into those planning policies basically early, it can help to mitigate some of those increased impervious surfaces and work with treatment on lot, and actually can even improve on what the current situation is.
David, did someone try and call out to me? Was that you, David?
David X9 City of Sydney. Look at just a couple of observations. So Christian's very accurately described one of the pinch points of redevelopment of existing sites, not just the clearance of greenfield, but the churn of redevelopment and the loss of a tree at a time scenario, which is very, very powerful and unfortunate impact. There's a secondary aspect of that, and that is that on the most extreme heat days, trees which are coming to us, trees will hopefully be able to cope, but the understory, I recall that the Sydney incident some years ago of sort of 45-degree day, even in the east, and I recall that the understory in places, council's own plantings failed because of the extreme drying that occurred on that day. Now, the loss of the upper story exposes the understory, and you get this double whammy. And then, of course, people's motivation to replace understory if they've lost it in an extreme heat event, people are very unmotivated to do that. The solution is really, very, very blunt and direct government policy in this area, and conveying that successfully to the public to say every tree you've got is a godsend and needs to be understood to be that, and therefore chipping away at the roots when you seek to do your extension at the rear or whatever. These are, in the end, inverted commas, catastrophic incidents, because they will lead to localized extreme heat. But unfortunately, conveying that to the general public is still challenging, but we've got to get there, and quite quickly, because trees remain the cheapest and most effective way of ameliorating urban heat at the low density and medium density context.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. I know that I think councils are different in terms of the level of focus they give to tree and the removal of trees, and so it's not across the board. It's down to council to council, and again, it's that patchy response that's going to be a challenge as well, I guess. But thanks for that, David. Ryan has got something in here. I'm going to read out yours, Ryan. It's passing through filter bed kind of system should be in place at the very least to treat stormwater for recharge aquifer purposes. Okay, this goes back to Sakar's question, which is thanks for that, Ryan. I'll keep going with it. Alternatively, the harvested rainwater can be well treated and utilised rather than sending it all the way to the aquifer and then pumping it back to ground level for usage. And I guess it's just to add to that, Ryan, it would depend on where the groundwater is being reused, whether it's being used in an urban environment or further down in agriculture. So I guess it comes down to the different types of purposes. I think I'll move on to Christine. Here's a question. Some others may want also to hear the answer regarding recharged aquifers. Is there a way of sharing? I think we can do that, and I'll talk to Beth about that. Chris, when you send out, maybe you send something to Beth about where to look.
I am here.
Oh, Beth's here.
I'm
Beth.
listening. I'm eating my lunch.
Save my life.
I didn't hear the question though. Sorry. What was the question?
A very interesting question about, putting down new urban developments. You're reducing the amount of water going into the aquifer. Some places in Israel, I think it was, and also Adelaide, recharge the aquifers and how that's done. And there was some interest around how that's done. And Chris said that he had some information on that and wanted and thought he would share it. Can he send that information to you and then you forward out to everyone who attended the webinar?
Yes. Yep. I can send it to everyone who registered for the webinar.
Awesome. Fabulous. Okay, I'll keep trucking on. We've still got 9 minutes. Okay, another question here. I felt the same way as Ryan mentioned. Is it perhaps because taking the treated stormwater to specific development may be difficult, whereas recharging the aquifer means it goes into a common reservoir from which water can be drawn? Okay, I'm not sure if I can answer that. Chris, Tim, you want to have a crack? I'm not really an expert on aquifer recharge, so I don't feel responsible But anyway, hopefully that information that Chris provides will help answer that one. Okay, here's another one. The scenario tool looks really promising for planning purposes. Can I just ask if there is a charge to get this tool, as I can't find it on the CRC website? Thanks. Chris.
I refer to Beth for those questions. So it's kind of, if you want to use it, then get in touch with Beth, and there are different options in terms of CSC participants and non-CSC participants and so on. But it's definitely something, yeah, Beth is going to be able to help you with.
Yep, send me an email, please.
Okay, so if you're interested in the tool, send Beth an email. That's the answer?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Zakia. At times when we have excessive rainfall, which goes to runoff and have depleted groundwater at about 1 metre per year, we may go for aquifer recharge. So that sounds like a statement. Again, that's a lot of interest. It's interesting. There's a lot of interest coming in about that groundwater recharge question. Okay, I'm just seeing if we've got different systems that might be useful. Someone sent in a link which we might share through Beth. We've got a thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Tim. Just this is from Peter Chambers. Just a friendly mention that maintenance has a significant impact on the effectiveness on any WUSA system. Yes, Peter, thank you for mentioning that. That happens to be my favourite issue. And Stormwater New South Wales has prepared a guide to show how to look after assets. Oh, thanks, Peter. Yeah, just since Peter's raised it, I'll give it a quick plug. Stormwater New South Wales has developed an operation and maintenance manual for stormwater control measures. It includes pretty much all, in fact, probably all right now, the proprietary devices and how to clean them and maintain them, specifications and all that sort of stuff. We're also looking to run some training courses this year, in addition to the ones we did last year. So Beth, hit up Beth or myself, or hit up me through Beth if you're interested in the operation and maintenance manual and the associated training courses. Thank you, Peter.
We'll also be doing a webinar, I think it's the 1st of March is the stormwater webinar. So we have Murray Powell talking about operation and maintenance of stormwater, I think of biofiltrations as well. So we have that coming up as one of our webinars.
Awesome. Maria, do you want to plug that anymore, or are you happy with Best plug? Because you're on mute, Maria, if you're still there, if you haven't run off to make a cup of coffee. Oh, there she is.
It's regarding March webinar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's on 29th March from 12:30 to 1:30. It's on the chapter 3 of ARR 2019, and also it's on the vote sensitive urban design bioretention. It's about the bioretention.
Ah, good. Thanks, Maria.
It's regarding, actually, I don't have the exact title of the, it's about the philosophy of urban stormwater management from Peter Combs. And the second one is from ICD 2020 Young Author Seminar presenter, Sylvie from Canada. It's on mature bioretention performance assessment.
Yeah. And Maria's been really busy with us at Stormwater New South Wales getting those events together. And as we nail them down, the dates of the speakers, we'll be sure to send those out through our distribution. And I might talk to Beth about how to make sure, because not everyone here might not be a member of Stormwater New South Wales, so we'll try and get those out as far and wide as possible.